It's time for the Rutledge Perspective Radio Show live here on KCOH TV Radio, The Boost in Houston, Texas. And I'm your host, Laurel Rutledge, and I cannot wait for the show to start because spending Tuesday mornings with you is a highlight of my week. And if you're listening or watching on one of my pages, be sure to give StreamYard permission so I can see your name and I can see your comments. And let me know where you're tuning in from so I can give you a shout out on the air. I know we have a global audience, and I want to acknowledge you for taking the time to listen to me, for those of you in my time zone, and for those of you who are way out of it. I also want to welcome your questions and your comments. Now, I got to run so I can get ready. See you soon. Good morning. It's Tuesday morning. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I am Laurel Rutledge, the host of the Rutledge Perspective Radio Show. Good morning, Bobby, from Los Angeles. We got Los Angeles in the house. The Rutledge Perspective Radio Show live here in the KCOH Global Network station at the corner of Wichita and Alameda in the historic 3rd Ward of Houston, Texas, in our beautiful open looking glass window. Good morning, Jan. We need to talk. Good morning, Jan. So I got DeSoto in the house too. So I'm so glad y'all are here. I was telling Jerry, I said, I got up. I was so focused this morning. I got up. I started working. I got some things done. Then all of a sudden I looked up. I'm like, crap, I got to go. And my notes are sitting on my desk. I was sitting up all my stuff and was like, oh man, I'm going to have to do something different with my camera because I can't find my little piece. I had set it right here on the, y'all. So it happens. And I got my thumb wrapped up. So when you see the pink, I've just got my thumb wrapped up. Thank you. Yeah, the hair is out now, right? It's springtime. So they say it's 80 degrees here. So we see how long Katie's going to be out. So Tabitha has Donna. I have Katie. So we'll see how long Katie shows her face right now. Because when it gets hot, Katie has to go away. So I'm so glad to have you guys here. Y'all know me. So we always have to talk about voting. And Nigeria did do their elections. There were some things that people were claiming around, some inaccuracies, some inefficiencies, some intimidation. There were things like that were happening, but there wasn't this like full-blown country madness. Thank you, Bobby. Full-blown country madness. They are, when I read it this morning, because I went to see if they'd done anything final yet. I have not seen the final results yet in Nigeria. But there was a person who they didn't expect who won Lagos, who is a newcomer. There were 18 people who ran for president in Nigeria. So that happened last week. So we'll see, hopefully in the coming weeks, who the new leadership is of Nigeria. And nothing else starts here in the States until March. Which March starts tomorrow. Y'all, I can't believe it's March tomorrow. But March starts tomorrow. And so kind of mid to end of March, we've got some special elections that are happening in the U.S. So as always, go get registered. Find a place. Good morning, Mama Young. Find a place to go get registered. If you're 18, about to turn 18, get the information you need to go get registered to vote. Make sure you go to your county board of elections. Make sure you understand what all the rules are. And if you are already registered, it's a good thing just once a quarter to go check your registration. Make sure somebody hadn't just pulled you off the polls just because, there's some kind of madness going on. So just double check that you're still good to go. And if not, you have time to rectify it before the next election comes up. Also, make sure you're educating yourself around the issues. It starts local. So school boards, councilmen, water commissioner, all those things. It starts local and then builds. So make sure you're getting really educated on the issues that affect you and affect your town and your city and your county and all those kind of things so that you can participate in the process. It is important for us to do that. So please, go get registered. That's a great birthday gift, by the way, to get somebody registered to vote. Go take them, go have lunch, go get registered to vote. Great thing to do. On tomorrow, Wednesday, there's 2 things happening. So I'm doing a special edition of the Rutledge Perspective podcast, the podcast that drops every Wednesday. I had a fireside show with 3 doctors, one of whom was my cousin. So I have to put that out there because I want to own it. Because somebody say, how come you got him? He truly is a physician. He's a board certified physician. he is a concierge physician in New York City. And then I had two of my sorority sisters who are also physicians, both in family practice. One is down here in Pearland, Texas, and she is a board certified family medicine practitioner. And then the other one is in Tennessee. She's also board certified doctor of osteopathic medicine, and also focused on not only family medicine, but obesity medicine. And she's very much moving people into kind of plant-based lifestyles. But anyway, on Fireside, a couple weeks ago, I had them on. And it was such an incredible conversation about health and health outcomes and taking charge of our health. And so the podcast this week on the Rutledge Perspective podcast is actually going to be a release through the podcast process of that show from Fireside. So you will see it. It is long. So normally my podcasts are 15 to 20 minutes unless it's an interview. This is a long one because it's a panel. So stick with it. There's some really good stuff in there. In fact, my podcast producer sent me a note this morning. He said, hey, just letting you know, I went out and looked at the show, getting it ready. He said, it was so good. He said, it was so good. It was so powerful. We were going to trim it to about 30 minutes. He said, I think we need to do the whole thing. He said, and quite frankly, I needed to hear it. He said, because I don't normally go to the doctor. He said, I go now so I can continue to have my VA benefits. He said, but if that wasn't the case, I wouldn't be going. And that was one of the things they talked about is being your own advocate, being in charge of your health, not being afraid to go. When something's not right, go see somebody, right? Go see somebody. So you will see that on Wednesday. Also on Wednesday evening, 7:30 p.m. Central Time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, I will be on Fireside as a guest of Stephanie McGann Jansen on her show. And if you guys have been on Fireside, Steph, we call her the Mayor of Fireside. She's phenomenal. And so I'm going to get to have a conversation with her. Who knows what we're going to be talking about? Good morning, Sarah Marsha. Who knows what we're going to get into in that conversation, because it's also the beginning of Women's History Month. So we're going to be talking about a whole lot of stuff. So join me on Fireside. You can go to firesidechat.com. You can go to any of my social media profiles and you'll see a link in there to get onto Fireside, and then follow me so you can get the announcements, and follow Stephanie because she's got great stuff too. So that's coming up on Wednesday. So I will be doing that. And then I'm looking to have a couple of people on for Women's History Month as well, on Fireside. And then you're also going to see, I got a chance to meet Muriel and Akil from the Generator and the Launchpad, the downtown Launchpad here in Houston, along with Legina Ray from the US Space, and got to do a quick lunch and learn on preventing burnout last week. And so I'm actually going to have Muriel and Akil on here in the studio and radio show soon. So we're trying to find a Tuesday that works for them, and you guys will get to meet them to talk about what it means to really be starting something new, incubating, supporting people, lifting people up, that kind of thing. Because it's great stuff that they're doing. So I will have them as guests. So lots of good stuff coming on the radio show. And I appreciate you guys tuning in and following and supporting. I truly do. So thank you so much for being here. I also realized, even though the podcast and the radio show, there's this big global audience, we track the numbers. And so I realized, I was like, wait, the numbers on the podcast through listen seem to be really slowing down. I don't know what's going on. And I realized Apple had disconnected. So for those of you who are on Apple Podcasts, for some reason it had disconnected. So I wasn't seeing what those things were. So thank you for still being there. I really appreciate it, and know that everything is now reconnected. So just in case it was really gone, it is all back in there. So lots of stuff happening. The website refresh is coming, just lots of stuff. So I'll be putting that stuff out there for you guys. So let's get into today. And of course, because as I said earlier, all my notes are sitting on my desk at home. Here's what we're going to talk about today, because I realized and decided what I was going to talk about. My mom called me before I get in. She said, what are you going to talk about? I'm like, I'm not sure. Because I had like 4 or 5 different things. And then as I was driving, I'm like, yep, this is the thing. So what I want to talk about as we end February in Black History Month, end Heart Health Month, and move into Women's History Month is the fact that we all have a story. We all have a story. And this came about because I've been talking to a bunch of friends lately and listening to a lot of things and just contemplating, marinating, all the things. And as I get ready to figure out about, my book, one of the things that Jenny tells me all the time, and you guys have heard me talk about Jenny, she is like my woman Friday, right? She does my clips and all that kind of stuff. And she says, Laurel, when they're talking and then every once in a while you'll slip in a story. She said, that's so good. And anytime you talk to people, it's the stories, right? The stories of your journey, the stories of what happened that begin to bring people together. And when you think about Black History Month or Women's History Month or any kind of things like that, it's the stories that bring us together. It's the stories that align us with our roots. And even in talking to my therapist yesterday, she's like, Laurel, remember your tree, go back to your roots. Because there was just a lot of stuff going on. I was like, you know what? You're right. Because I tell people, physician heal thyself. I tell people all the time, when things feel off for me, one of my 4 things that are in my root system is off: faith, family, friends, or health, right? One of those 4 things is not on point if my world is kind of upside down. And so kind of went back to that. And I had heard this podcast on NPR, or an interview on NPR, with Micah L. Anders. She's out of Minnesota. She is a genealogy specialist. So she really digs into ancestry, especially for African American families. And I heard her talking and I thought, oh, let me reach out to her, which I did this morning. I sent her an email this morning. And I'm meeting with her on Monday. So I'm really excited about that. But she was talking about, the stories and everything. As I moved into 2023 with all of you and listening to all of you and the comments that I get and the things people say, and the fact you heard me a couple of weeks ago, all this madness happening in Florida and even in House Bill 1006 here in Texas about trying to erase African-American history. And I said, I refuse to have my very existence erased. I refuse to have that happen. But the crux of that is, when we don't tell stories, when we don't understand the history through that great gift of storytelling, when we don't understand what's gone on before us through the stories, our own and those around us, we lose something, right? We lose history. We lose the why. We lose how we got here. What is that saying? Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. We got here because of all of the other things that happened before. So if you erase history, right, then all of a sudden you're doing things, you're like, well, I don't know why. And you could repeat something because you didn't know the consequences of that, because no one ever told you and you clearly didn't experience it yourself, right? So history is more than just history for history's sake. It is history for learning and engagement and keeping stories alive, keeping languages alive. There's a restaurant, I think I talked about it last week. There's a restaurant up in, I think he's in the Dakotas, maybe in Minneapolis. I think he might be in Minneapolis. And it's called the Sioux Chef, Sioux, Sioux Chef. He is from the Sioux tribe. And the whole purpose of his restaurant is to get back to indigenous eating, right? And it's all about the foods that we've lost, the recipes, the nutrition, the ability to nourish ourselves and to reconnect to who we are through food. And I met someone at this summit in Puerto Rico who talked about the medicines that they have. And it's not just peyote. There's so much medicine, some of which is grown only on these reservations, that I still am baffled that we even still have in 2023. But that's a conversation for a different time. And she was talking about these medicines and the nature of these medicines and what they do, and how now you see so many even traditional Western medicine moving towards at least being open to more Eastern types of remedies, more holistic type of medicine, right? Exercise, nutrition, medicines, vitamins, supplements. And I'm not talking about the stuff that's just, buy this thing and get 2 bottles for $19.99. I'm talking about people who traditionally and over generations have learned to use what's around them, what's grown around them, and the medicinal purposes for those things, right? And so this idea of we all have a story is that by not telling our stories, by not listening to other stories and then continuing to relay them, That oral history is something that's lost. And, libraries talk about, I think it was in a library promotion that I saw not too long ago. When an elder dies, we lose a library, right? When an elder dies, we lose a library. That elder history, that oral history that they have, that they may or may not have shared all of. Not only our health history and our family history, right? But experiences that begin to form behaviors and thought processes and perspectives that we can then use to do something different and to move forward, right? Everybody's story has value. Everybody's story has a level of import to it that can impact someone who is listening. When I went to, the very first thing I went to when I decided to leave corporate and start my business, I went to an event called Speak and Write to Make Millions, or Speak or Write to Make Millions. It was put on by Lisa Nichols. And I had happened to listen to her. Someone had told me about a podcast, and the podcast has since changed names. I think he's still got one out there, but since changed names. And I was driving home. So that's an 8-hour drive. And I'm like, you know what? Let me just listen to some podcasts. Somebody told me about this one. And I was just flipping through and I saw Lisa Nichols and I was like, oh, okay, something told me to listen to this podcast. And it was so powerful to me, because one of the things that she says that I love is your conviction and your convenience don't live on the same block, right? Those things that are convenient for you are not necessarily going to enable you to get to the thing you want, because your conviction and your convenience don't live on the same block, because there may be things that butt up against your convenience to get to what you're convicted about, right? And so I went to her event, and it was huge, and it was a little more revivalish than my nervous system can tolerate. But in that whole process, one of the things that she continuously said was, everyone's story is important. Everyone has a story that someone needs to hear. And what's critical about that is, I remember thinking as I sat there is, I don't have a traditional story of tragedy, right? Story of hardship. I don't have what we stereotypically see and hear and buy the written stories of overcoming from a traditional or stereotypical sense, right? Those stories about overcoming abuse or overcoming addiction or overcoming, adoption and not knowing who your family was, or all, those things that we see as extremely important and hard, and those stories of triumph through those things. But that's not my story, right? And so what the narrative then that happens is, well, then my story can't at all help anyone because it's not hard enough. It's not tragic enough. It's not triumphant enough. I'm not sure my story matters. But that's the narrative that we tell ourselves. That's not true. Because everybody's story is important. There is something in every story that someone needs to hear because they're going through it themselves and they need to know they're not alone. So when I talk about everybody having a story, and we're coming out of Black History Month, and going into Women's History Month, I was thinking about the story that I posted at the very end, or the picture that I posted of my paternal grandmother. And I posted it on Valentine's Day because she passed away on Valentine's Day in 1994. And this woman, I talked about her briefly. This woman was just amazing. And I don't say that just because I'm biased, although I am a bit biased. I say that because, one, she grew up, she was born in 1908, right? So that ability to make things happen with nothing, they talk about segregated South, right? Segregated Texas. This is where she grew up. And she still became an incredible award-winning educator. She was an incredible musician and music teacher who was able to have a student win a state competition by teaching her piano at her house on her piano, but then painting a 2x4 with a keyboard and having her practice on that at home, right? Not to say anything about the talent of the person, not casting dispersions or casting judgment on her innate talent of this person. Clearly the person was talented. And my grandmother's instruction was able to pull that talent out of that person in order to have her overcome the obstacles of not having a piano. She was there by herself. My grandfather died when when my dad was in college. So she raised 3 boys the rest of the time by herself, back there off in Tucker, Texas, right in the middle of nowhere. And the story that she has is so much deeper than that. You know, and you can read a little bit about my family if you know the book True Women. Janice Woods Wendell, who wrote True Women. My family is actually my paternal grandmother's family on her side. The Lachey's are in that. So we got all that. We're having a family reunion in May, I think it is. And so as I posted this picture and was talking about stories and thinking about stories, she told us the stories of how, you know, my grandfather, when he died, all he owed for was a keg of nails, right? That he used to have them walk to the store. If they needed new shoes, they walked to the store, got the price of the shoes, walked back home to get the money, then walked to get the shoes and came back home. I'm like, well, no wonder your shoes were worn out, because see, you're making 4 trips to get 1 pair of shoes, right? But his point was he wasn't going to owe for anything. This is a man who shoed all the Klansmen's horses. So he knew who they were. He shoed all the Klansmen's horses. There's a museum, the Calaboose Museum. So if you're ever in San Marcos, I encourage you to go by the museum. Although there's some ugly stuff in there. They've got some KKK robes and stuff. I mean, it's got all the things, right? Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. It is what it is. That's what happened in Texas. But he also fashioned a brace, and we used to have the whole thing, and we don't know where it happened. Some people broke in, and you know how folks are, evil. And he had fashioned a brace for this woman who was paralyzed. And he fashioned it, he welded it together. So he was the only Black blacksmith in the area. Welded this brace together so that this woman could be carried behind the horse and carriage, right? And so it would keep her immobile. So many things that he did. Well, when I posted that, one of my cousins, my older cousin, called me and said, "Hey, did grandma ever tell you this story?" I'm like, "Yeah, she told me the one about the horses." He said, no. But did she tell you how? And how that happened? And I was like, "No." So, well, one day they were driving home in their carriage, right? The horse and buggy. Because again, 1900s, horse and buggy. It was after dark. And again, these are sunset towns, right? So Black folks, you had to be wherever you were going to be before dark. Sunset towns. And they were in their carriage. It was late. My grandmother's with him. They were late. And the Klan stopped them. There was a checkpoint. They stopped them. Asked him who was going there. Boots Cephas. And they're like, "Oh, Boots. Okay, well, you can go." Right? Because they knew who he was. Again, he shoed all the horses. I'm like, "Oh, that's great." He said, "Yeah." He said, "But here's the thing. He and his family, my grandmother, would be able to know who participated. And this is how they knew who participated, because he shoed all their horses. And in shoeing their horses, he had a code that he put on all the shoes to know who they were. So he knew them by their horse. Didn't matter that they had a sheet on. Didn't matter that they had a robe on. Didn't matter that he might not be able to understand their voice or recognize their voice, because he recognized the shoes that he put on the horse. So the story of innovation, the story of savvy, the story of intellect is a story that we don't want to lose, because the narratives that we have now is that we can't possibly be smart enough. We can't possibly be innovative enough. We are too lazy to be able to make things happen. When, as I saw somebody post, I think I saw the video on TikTok, she posted, she said, "Okay, so I learned your English. I learned your Spanish. I learned your Portuguese. I learned your French. You didn't learn any of mine, but I'm the one that's stupid." Now that's a dang good point, right? Those stories and the power of those stories enable us to sit in a space of taking up space, because we deserve to do so, right? We as Black people, we as people of color, we as women deserve to take up space because we exist and because we contributed. And these stories that they're trying to eliminate in Florida, these stories enable us to continue to demonstrate the contribution of othered people. One of the people that I'm going to be talking to in the next couple of weeks and going to get her on Fireside. If she's ever in Houston, I'm going to have her on the show. She is an expert in DEI. She is an attorney, came out of HR. We had her in my HR leadership group as a speaker. She's just incredible. She's an incredible human, but her experience is really great as well. And we always talk about DEI, and I can't, y'all have heard me talk about my sentiments on the B. So we talk about that space, and we've all learned how focusing on DEI is an economic decision, right? There's an ROI to focusing on that thing. And we're seeing all of this pressure now, including here in Texas, where there's no funding for any DEI departments, that there's on the one hand, we want freedom of value communication, but don't fund anything that says DEI or has DEI processes or purposes. Just madness, y'all. You need to be paying attention, listen to what people say, but believe what they do. Watch what people are doing. And so she was talking about this whole economic thing, but then she put it in this context. If you think about where the world is moving and where our nation is moving, there is going to be a point in time that if you are unable or unwilling to hire, train, promote, develop, encourage, include people that don't look like you, in particular Black and brown people, your business is going to go away because those are the workers that are going to be available in the marketplace in the not too distant future. I mean, it was just powerful, the kind of things that she said. And again, I'm going to have her on. Her name is Nikki Lanier. You need to go look her up, follow her. If you are looking for somebody to talk to your business that has some really amazing fact-based information, economic-based information, not emotional information, go look up this woman, Nikki Lanier. She's absolutely incredible. And again, I'm going to try to get her on my show so I can spread the message even more. But that idea of understanding, if we tell the right stories and we understand our stories and the power of those stories and the history behind those and the contributions that have been made, our ability to innovate and push forward and gain traction that we never thought possible is exponentially higher. If the narrative that we are listening to, the stories that we are hearing, and the stories we're telling ourselves is now based on truth and not emotion, based on fact and not our nervous system responding because of, past generational trauma, as well as toxic situations and systemic challenges. If we open the world up to hear, appreciate, and understand everyone's story and the value of that story, think about what we could do. Think about where we could be. I always say, you look at these people who are doing really bad stuff. If they use their genius for good instead of evil, think of where we would be. All these organizations with these toxic environments, with these people that should have been gone a long time ago. And I say that from the standpoint of, when it gets easy to fire people, you need to find something else to do. Because every time you fire someone, even if it's the right thing to do and when it's the right thing to do, if you have no emotion around that, something's wrong. You need to take a break, right? Because you're still impacting someone's life, even if they move to a place where it's time to make them be successful somewhere else. It's still a life you're impacting. But those organizations that refuse to deal with that bad behavior, those organizations that say we want to be innovative, we want people to take risks and then punish them for doing that, those organizations that keep breathing their own exhaust because they have the same people at the table every single time, those organizations that refuse to believe that folks who come into their organization with different experiences, that experience is real, because if they haven't seen it, it can't be real. But yet you hire them because you wanted something. All of that craziness that's based in ego, and not based in strategy and innovation and effectiveness will be the downfall of your organization. So all of you 150-year companies, 300-year companies, get it together. Get it together, because tomorrow is not promised. And two, tomorrow is not going to look like today. It can't, right? It is important that you figure out how to, good morning, mama, how to acknowledge, engage in, support, uplift, and spread stories that are not yours, stories that don't look like yours, stories that don't sound like yours, because there is power, there is innovation, there is resilience, there is strength, there is courage, there is hardship, there is overcoming, there is tragedy, there's all the things in all of those stories, in all of those stories. And through the power of storytelling, right, we enable ourselves to not only continue to support and push forward our own health, right? Because we definitely need to start telling the stories around our health. I found some health issues. I'm like, my grandmother suffered with that. She never said a word. I found it out by accident. She happened to have said something about fibroids at one point. I'm like, seriously, could you not have told somebody that this was happening so I could have been prepared? Right? We have a tendency to not tell health stories. We'll tell other family stories sometimes. And what this whole pervasiveness of ancestry.com and DNA tests and all of these kind of things has brought forth is a desire to connect to our history and connect to our story. And it's such a, if you can step back out of the emotion, it's such an interesting dichotomy, right? And again, for those of you who just joined, this is just my KT tape, right? Fixing my thumb. That dichotomy of the stories, on the one hand, you know, what COVID did, and when we were so separated from everybody, really pushed up the desire to know who we were and to get reconnected. The world is getting so much smaller. How do we connect with who we are, where we came from? You know, this has been a long time coming for folks who are, you know, adopted or things like that, searching for birth families to really understand. And we've on the one hand, we've gotten a big push to learn more about that, to learn more about those stories, to learn more about who we are and where we came from. Yet on the other hand, we've got these factions that are trying to eradicate and dismiss that history and those stories, to pretend it didn't exist. You know, I said last week, a woman said, you know, we believe, we don't know for sure, but we believe that African Americans who are now in the state were probably slaves and servants before they got here. Stop. That's a lie, because you know that's not true. You know that's not true. But that's indoctrination, right? You're so worried about indoctrination. That's indoctrination. It is a complete dismissal of an entire population of folks for your convenience, for your ego. Whereas, if we turn it around and we say, what is the power of the story I can learn from this history? And then we still need to exercise caution, because as the woman that I met in Puerto Rico, who is Native American and who is really working around this whole idea of medicines and natural medicines and trying to protect that on these native lands. Because now all of a sudden people are understanding it. And so there's exploitation happening. Of course, there's exploitation beginning to happen. When these stories get told, when the stories then get believed, we still have to pay attention to the behavior of people who are hearing the stories and then who are trying to capitalize on the stories. Because those folks aren't necessarily taken into consideration the people who own the stories, the people about whom the stories are written, right? The history of those folks who experienced the thing, whatever the thing was, whatever the story was. There's this kind of capitalism that we live in is based on a lot of exploitation, right? Exploitation of the loophole. They say, oh, I just found an opportunity and I jumped in. I seized the opportunity. Well, yeah, you did. At whose demise? At whose demise? But, because that's a different conversation too, that whole capitalist conversation. But if we begin to really take ownership of our own stories and the power of those stories, not only to uplift ourselves, but to uplift others, right? To let people know that there is opportunity. There's an ability to truly do great things, no matter your beginnings. There is so much power in that I'm not aloneness that can be gathered through telling really great stories and opening up about your stories. And as we end February, Black History Month and Heart Health Month, tell your health story to people. Tell your health story to your family. Even if you don't want anybody else to know, tell your health history to your family. You will hear the doctor say, you've got to have somebody that's an advocate. You must. My mom's on this morning, and I've told more than one people her story about how when she was in the hospital and somebody's about to give her a medication that she didn't take. And had I not been there, who knows what would have happened. You have to have an advocate. And the folks who are advocating for you need to know your health history. They need to know your health story. And they need to know it so well that they can advocate for you when you can't advocate for yourself. Which, by the way, also leads to getting your health directives and all those kind of things, right? We need to all get on our game and get our stuff in place, because tomorrow's not promised. And I'm guilty of that too. So I need to take care of my stuff too. But make sure you're telling the stories of who you are and where you came from. You'll hear one of the doctors on the podcast that released today say her grandmother, right, was a healer in her community. People came to her when they were sick, right? Wasn't a formally educated doctor, but she was a healer. You hear that a lot in Native American, indigenous people communities, right? The folks that people went to who healed other people. If they were sick, if they were hurting, if they were about to have a baby, doulas before we knew the word doula, right? Those stories of impact are in themselves impactful. They can change narratives, they can change lives, they can impact, right? The ability or the desire of someone to do something. So as opposed to believing that school counselor that tells you, for whatever their reason, that you can't be whatever you say you want to be, or your child can't be what they say they want to be, how about you go back and look at your stories? Where has your family, where have your ancestors moved forward and overcome and done when other people said they couldn't, and achieved when other people said it wasn't possible? And use those stories as your foundation to catapult you to whatever it is you desire and believe, right? That whole manifesting is not just about wishing, right? That's why I have a whole problem with manifest, because it seems so, most people talk about it in such a woo-woo term. I'm just going to think about it and just believe. I'm just going to believe. Okay, you know what? Faith without works is dead. You got to do some work. But the stories can help change that narrative. The stories can demonstrate the work. That's why I posted, when I was posting quotes a lot, there was a quote that said, we need to stop comparing our behind the scenes to somebody else's highlight reel. That's the problem with social media. You see everybody's highlight reel. You don't see their behind the scenes. That's why my little live on IG over the weekend was me, my hair twisted up, my little workout stuff, because I'd gone to church, I'd done my running around, I'd gone to Buchanan's the other day, I'd gone to get my stuff, put on my gardening clothes, right? So it wasn't cute, but I was out there getting some sun, putting my hands in the dirt with gloves on, because I don't do bugs, and making some things happen. And I'll post pictures of what I planted, because it's planting season, y'all. So think more about what stories are you telling, or what stories do you need to tell? And don't let someone tell you that your story is not important. We're going to do some shout outs here in a minute. That your story is not important, because just because your story doesn't look like everyone else's, or every book that you've read, or every self-help that you've seen, or whatever, doesn't mean that your story is not important, because there are probably people who are going through what you went through too, who would love to see how you got through it, or are going through it, right? All of that is powerful. All of that is powerful. Okay, let's do some shout outs.
Okay, we've got the Australia, Canada, Brazil, Netherlands, France, Mexico,
Yay.
Germany, Finland, Canaan. We've got Panama City,
Yeah.
Nassau, Bahamas.
Oh, all right,
Bahamas. We've got Dubai. Hey, Dubai.
Hey, Dubai.
And we've got Frankfurt, Helsinki. We've got Baltimore, New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth, Raleigh, Kansas City, Washington, D.C., Houston, Missouri City.
I love it. And I got Odessa, and I've got Houston, and I've got LA, and I've got DeSoto. So we are all in the house today, and I so appreciate you guys as always. I love it, and I'm so honored because we all have a choice. So I'm always so honored when you decide to spend some time with me on a work day, right? When you choose to spend a little time listening to what I have to say and what I have to share, because it is a choice, right? It is a choice. And the fact that you choose to spend the time with me is, I do not take that for granted. So I believe that it is important that we are willing to talk about our experiences, and in whatever way those have shown up, because it will help someone else. I was the guest on a podcast with Chef B. So the other person I'll be putting out there, Chef B, she's in Atlanta, Natasha Bruley, Dr. Natasha Bruley. She has now left. She was an educator in college. She was a college educator at a university, and has since left that and started her business that is meal prep, plant-based, all of these kind of things. She has a YouTube channel too, Chef B with 3 E's, B-E-E-E, Chef B. She has a YouTube channel as well, and she does things like try different stuff, and online she videos it, so she can try it and then she can tell you how it is. And so I had her on my show, and we were talking about plant-based and food and mango and jackfruit and all these kind of things. So I'm like, I can't get my mind wrapped around jackfruit. And she said, we have this narrative that even being plant-based, we still want things to taste like meat, right? So we put all this stuff on it. We take mushrooms and we season them all up so they taste like chicken, or they taste like whatever. Same with jackfruit. We do it so it tastes like chicken or beef or whatever we want it to taste like, turkey or pork. And she said a lot of that, which was interesting. She said, we have to think through what is the story that taste, right? That memory that taste is telling us, that says, no, you're not eating meat, but you need to be eating meat, right? You got to have that meat taste for the food to be real, for it to be nutritious, for you to be able to tolerate it. And her perspective is, but it's fabulous in its natural state. So if you think about jackfruit, she said, when you go to the islands and you eat jackfruit, she's from Guyana. If you go to the islands and you eat jackfruit, she said, it's not white. Jackfruit, when it's ripe, is this beautiful yellow. She said, and it's sweet. It's like coconut, pineapple kind of. I'm like, oh, well, that I could probably try. So now I'm like, can't wait to get back to Jamaica to try some real jackfruit. And I remember having coconut water years and years and years ago and thinking, I can't do that. But then I tried it again in Jamaica. Now I was older. I had a more adult and mature palate, right? And that coconut water that came out of those fresh coconuts in Jamaica will change your life, right? It was so good. It is an acquired taste because it is sweet water, but it was so good. And that story, again, the story we tell ourselves around what we eat and how we eat it, right? That in order for it to be flavorful, it has to have so much salt in it, right? Soul food has to be full of salt and fat for it to be good. Now, don't get me wrong. Everything's better with a little bit of bacon. So it tastes good with a little bit of bacon. But there are ways to enjoy food, right? The narratives, they're a way to enjoy things that don't include sacrificing or jeopardizing our health. Now, you want the cake, eat the cake. You want the soul food, eat the soul food. Life is too short for you to be doing nothing but eating grass, right? Eat in a way that satisfies you, that shows love to you, that honors you, honors your environment, right? Honors those people that have told you stories. But think about food in a little different. So when I when I think about food, and when I when I eat a certain thing, right? They say smell really brings back memories. Taste does too. And there are things about food that is not so much the food, it's the memory and the story around the food, right? It's the story around those rolls that I posted over the holidays that my brother made me a pan of my grandmother's rolls, right? It's the stories that are brought up when I see and taste those rolls. It's the story that's brought up and the memories that are brought up when I make my grandmother's bread pudding. And when I tell people I am a bread pudding snob, if it's not like my grandmother's bread pudding that I know how to make, it's more pudding than bready, I'm not having it, right? It's not real bread pudding if it's some kind of cinnamon roll thing. Some things you just need to leave alone, right? But it's that the stories that we have that are connected to the food we eat, or the drinks we have, or the travel we do, or the books we read. It's the stories connected to those that ground us, not only in ourselves, but that connect us to other people. And when you're leading, one of the greatest gifts a great leader can have is the ability to tell stories, the ability to connect people through that storytelling. You know, it is storytelling when you're putting together a strategy and then having to get people aligned with that strategy to actually make it happen. It's storytelling when you're putting out a new benefits plan or a new program or a new product, whatever it is. You're telling a story about the thing so that people who need the thing or who you want to get the thing in front of understand how the thing connects to them or connects to the thing that's important to them. Everyone has a story, and the ability to use the stories to connect to people is absolutely incredibly powerful. And I don't think we do it enough. I know I don't tell enough stories. I know I don't. I know I need to do a much better job of telling stories. And I'm working on that. Because see, when you tell your story, you got to be willing to let people know all your business. Well, not all your business. You got to let people in a little bit more when you're willing to tell your story. And that means a willingness and an ability to be vulnerable, right? To tell people the ugly, because it's not all pretty, right? To tell people about somebody throwing a book at you in a meeting at your second job that you ever had. That's a true story. And then to tell you in that same meeting that you had a chip on your shoulder because they have a lot of Black friends. True story. So it was you, not me. I just threw a book at you, but it's your problem, not me. I'm not the issue. You're the issue. This is the real deal, folks, right? But telling those kinds of stories helps people recognize that, look, my experiences are real. These things really happened. So don't, corporate explain my experience or corporate explain away my experience. Now, you may not like it. It may make you feel some type of way. It may make you embarrassed, or it may plug at your ego. That really is on you. Because see, this story is about me. It's not about you. And how I used that and that experience to move to where I needed to be. My story of resilience, my story of overcoming, my story of dealing with a situation that was incredibly toxic. And there's so much more about that situation. And those stories will come out over time. There's so much more about that involvement with that particular individual. And part of that story is we learn as much, if not more, from really bad bosses as we do from really great ones. We learn how not to be, how not to show up, how not to treat people from those folks who aren't leaders and absolutely should not be in a leadership position. And I call that out specifically because leadership is about behavior, not about position. Because we all know those people who are in leadership positions who are not leaders and shouldn't be anywhere near a management, supervisor, VP, much less CEO role. We all know them. We all know them. And so it's incumbent upon us as we continue to tell our stories that even in those situations where we've got to respond to something that is unpleasant, that we tell our story in that situation. It's incredibly important that we do that, right? Sherry.
Cynthia, I'm laughing at her. She's talking about, is there life after death? Throw a book and let's see.
What?
I guess that would be her story. Is there life after death?
Yes.
Throw a book and let's see. So she's saying if she got a book thrown at her, it'd be a problem.
Yeah, see? I get it. Yes.
Denise Washington said being transparent can be difficult.
Being transparent can be extremely difficult. But remember, there's a difference between transparency and telling everybody all your business. Mm-hmm. And we often confuse the two. You can be transparent with it about everybody knowing what you had for breakfast every day, right? People don't need to be in the bowels of your business for you to be transparent. Transparent is about, here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing it and here's the outcome we expect. Or here's the situation, here's what happened, here's how I responded. They don't necessarily need to know that, well, the reasons for my response were this thing that happened to me 30 years ago and blah, 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 right? There's a difference between transparency. Transparency can be at whatever level is comfortable for you and appropriate for the situation, right? We often confuse that if you're not telling everybody every detail, then you're not being transparent. And that's not necessarily true. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. You can hold back some private information and still be transparent about the situation in which you find yourself, right? That is absolutely possible and happens with the best leaders. The best leaders are able to do that. The best leaders are able to do that.
I shared a meme the other day that I saw and I thought it was so good. It said, I can post on social media all day long and you still not know my business.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
People assume if you're posting on social media or you're public that they know your business, but that's not true because
right.
You don't share everything of your life.
Right.
On social media or with anybody.
Right. And social media is a great example because on the one hand, there's a level of vulnerability that you can show that enables people to know who you are so they can decide if they want to work with you. Mm-hmm. There's a level of that. So showing up authentically as you, even though we use that word a lot, showing up consistently, right? Like you're the same all the time for the most part. Mm-hmm. Your attitude, all that stuff is the same. But that still doesn't mean that everybody knows everything. Mm-hmm. And they don't need to. I am really good at separating a business relationship from a personal relationship. Mm-hmm. Every once in a while, you meet people where the two combine, right? Where your business relationships, it results in a really deep and meaningful friendship. That's like really powerful. But it's not necessary to do good work. You are not obligated to become friends with everybody you work with. In fact, that is absolutely not part of your job description at all. It's why I always tell people that work with me, I'm like, stop saying we treat everybody like family. We want everybody to be family. That is a lie. No, you don't. No, you don't. What you really want, you want them to be comfortable. You want them to feel valued, all that kind of stuff. But think about that last Thanksgiving dinner you went to. You don't want everybody to be like family. And you want to treat everybody like family, right? That just stop. And so what happens is people think that that's what's necessary, that you have to be friends with everybody. Your work family is not your family. There may be people that you work with who become like family, your chosen family, but it is not automatic that work family equals family. It's not automatic. And in fact, if you go in with that attitude, that's where a lot of things get in trouble because your ego gets in the way and your feelings get hurt. When people don't respond the way you want them to respond because you had an expectation that this was family. I can tell all of my business. I can let everybody know everything I'm thinking all the time, everything that's going on with me. Here's the deal. They don't care. They don't care. And in many cases, all of that information you're giving to somebody is going to come back to you as ammunition. Mm-hmm. So you have to be mindful. You have to be mindful of what stories you're telling, in what context, and in what situation. You own your stories. You own the narrative. He who speaks first owns the narrative, right? That's why we got all this stuff around COVID, right? He who speaks first owns the narrative. When the first people speaking were saying it wasn't real, that's the narrative that took over, right? Because we are really quick to jump on a bandwagon. Real quick, because it's easy. Critically thinking and pausing is hard because we're in an instant gratification situation. But if we pause and dig deeper, right? Really into the stories that were being told. Is this a narrative that matches the facts or doesn't match the facts? Is this a narrative that is someone's personal story? And then I don't have any judgment on that. If that's their personal story, who am I to judge their personal story? But if the story I'm being told is about something that's broad that impacts me and all this kind of stuff, I need to dig into that. I need to understand how that story aligns with my personal experiences and the facts as I know them. And if it doesn't align, I need to be strong enough to go adjust or go mine some additional facts to just confirm. We are not sheep. Think critically, right? You don't have to just follow because somebody said follow, right? Understand the stories that are being told to you, the context of those stories, the purpose of those stories, right? Where those stories are coming from and how you can use those stories to lift yourself and others up. Stories are critical to our ability to maintain connection and to move ourselves and others forward. To move ourselves and others forward. You know, that that story of the book is going to come out in my book, among others. But I also think that it's important as we tell these stories that we understand why we're telling them. That why question, that's my favorite question. Why are we telling these stories? Sometimes we tell these stories for our own gratification or just for our own purging, right? I just got to get this off my heart, off my mind. I got to tell somebody. That's one reason why we tell stories. Sometimes we tell stories because we really do want to help people understand the context in which a decision was made, right? We want people to understand that there's a why behind it. And then other times we tell stories simply for information, right? For entertainment. And we need to understand what is the purpose for the storytelling, because that impacts not only the audience, it impacts our tone, it impacts the way we tell it, it impacts the manner in which we tell it, right? What is the purpose? Why are you telling your story? For what impact? And that should guide and inform how you tell that story. And that includes the story you're telling yourself. And being so self-aware that you can recognize when the story you're telling yourself is a narrative that is formed over years that has nothing to do with fact, but is informed by experiences. So the story itself may or may not be true, versus the story you're telling yourself that says, yep, you know what? I am absolutely entitled to and deserving of all of these things that I'm going after because I am hearing what my purpose is and I am putting in work to make it happen. And I know me, I am willing, right, to fail. I am willing to listen. I am willing to get feedback. I am willing to try some things, right? The most important stories that we can have are the stories we tell ourselves, then the stories we tell and hear from our family and close friends, because those are the things that inform who we are and how we show up. Right? All right. Thank you guys for listening to my story about stories today. It is, I really take this particular thing seriously because for me, right, it stemmed from my own experience in that my stories were not important, or they weren't hard enough or harsh enough, right? The overcoming wasn't big enough. But please know that there is someone out there who needs to hear your story, who needs to know how you did it, whatever it is, because they themselves are struggling with something. So never feel like your story isn't good enough, isn't big enough, is too small, isn't tragic enough, isn't happy enough, isn't whatever, all the enoughs, right? Your story is enough because it's yours. And as my friend Holly says, right, you don't have to be perfect to be priceless, because you are priceless because you are here. So thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening to my stories. And I am going to do a better job of telling more of my stories. So thank you for being here and listening to them. And go out and tell some of your own stories. Let people know who you are, what you think, and why. And then tune in tomorrow. So the podcast is coming out tomorrow with the doctors. And that's really powerful. So listen to that. It'll be downloaded. It'll be available tomorrow morning early. And then catch me on Fireside. I have no idea what Steph and I are going to talk about, but it's going to be good, whatever it is, because we always have great conversations. So join me tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. Central on Fireside to listen to my show, my interview with Stephanie McGann Jensen. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, KCOH Global Network. Thank you, everybody around the world. We'll catch you next week. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Make